Over the weekend, I was asked to cover an Austin FC versus San Jose Earthquake match. That's Major League Soccer, the MLS, for a magazine whenever I was in Austin, Texas. In doing so, I opted to use a Canon R6 I rented, as well as with native RF lenses, as well as with some EF lenses. And I was just dipping my toe in the water because I was thinking if the R6 does great, I'll upgrade to the R6 Mark II and I'll move to strictly full frame cameras. Not because I'm missing anything from my Fujifilm, I was just curious because of all the marketing that's going around. Now, let me just tell you right now, I'm not switching. And the reason is because you don't need a full frame camera. When it comes to full frame versus APS-C, let me tell you right now, the gap has gotten so much smaller and smaller. And even the fact that there are a lot of APS-C cameras that are better than full frame cameras, even in similar price points. You don't need a full frame camera because at the end of the day, is APS-C less than full frame? No. And honestly, it's going to get better. Immediately, let me tell you, I'm not a full frame hater. I just hate people that make full frame cameras their personality and dismiss every single type of photography that isn't that. The same way I don't like when film shooters make film photography their personality and dismiss everything unless it's film. I stand by everything I'm saying. The XH2 is a better camera than the Canon R6, and I rented the Canon R6 instead of the R6 Mark II because of these two reasons. The R6 has a higher buffer than the R6 Mark II. The second thing is, the Canon R6 was supposed to have the exact same autofocus system as the Canon R5. And if the Canon R6 outpaced in the autofocus world as well as in the buffering world, my XH2, I knew that I would be able to upgrade to the Canon R6 Mark II and be just fine. But here's the issue. It didn't outpace it either. In fact, the battery life and the buffer were worse than the XH2, and you can thank the XH2's CF Express Type B card for how well the buffer does even at 40 megapixels. And I even got 15 frames per second mechanical versus the 12 frames per second mechanical in the R6. And that's because the R6 Mark I, just like the R6 Mark II, only has dual UHS Type 2 or whatever it is, SD card slots. It just is what it is. Couple on the fact that for video on that side, the XH2 offers more bang for my buck because I actually have 8K recording instead of 4K. Instead of just C-Log 1 and 3 from Canon, I have F-Log 1 and 2 in 10-bit internal, as well as I can shoot ProRes RAW, high quality 422, DCI, 4K, low, whatever it is. I get all of that internally and whenever I export. You see, in an R6, I can't get either of that. And the reason why I'm comparing these two is because at launch, the R6 was around $2,500. And the XH2 is still sitting at around $2,000, $2,100, which the R6 is now sitting at now. So with that being said, which one's better? The camera that has the exact same autofocus, because their autofocus was exactly the same, if not better on the XH2. So if cameras both have the exact same autofocus, one's faster with read-write speed in stills in the XH2, one has higher megapixels in the XH2, and one has better video specs and, in my opinion, better colors in the XH2, seems like the XH2 wins. An APS-C camera is better than a flagship, unfortunately for Canon, full-frame camera. I'm eventually going to talk about the Canon R6 and my experience because I do think that's a great pickup for a lot of people that are doing certain things, but I'll release that on my channel membership side. I just launched that so you guys can become a member with me, and with that, you'll get a plethora of things. It'll just be deeper, in-depth conversations about cameras or work behind the scenes on some of my things, as well as how I edit, how I color grade, what softwares I use, as well as with any future podcasts with anyone that I have, from the Anti-Like-a-Like-a Club, aka the Three Amigops, to my boy Lonnie George. Anyone that I can think of that I'm going to have these conversations with, it'll be there. So enter at your own risk. But D, you didn't use the R6 Mark II, and it's way better than anything, and it blows Fujifilm out of the water. No, it absolutely doesn't. I already know that the R6 Mark II, according to Canon, has a shallower buffer than the R6 Mark I. If the XH2 beat it, I already know that the XH2S, which is at the exact same price right now as the R6 Mark II is at launch, but has a stack sensor, is going to whoop its ass whenever it comes to read-write speed. A stack sensor is just going to do it. With that stack sensor and the processor that is on those, as well as with the different type of cards like CF Express Type B, that just gives it so many improvements in autofocus, read-write speed, and the ability to be able to intake and write certain video and photo, etc. The autofocus is going to be faster in the XH2S as well, because I know for a fact the XH2S blows the XH2 out of the water. And if the R6 Mark II is just an incremental upgrade over the R6, I already know it's going to blow the R6 Mark II out of the water in the exact same way. When it comes to video, they're pretty neck and neck. C-Log1, C-Log3, and RAW. Fujifilm has F-Log1, F-Log2, as well as RAW video capability. Fujifilm does give you the opportunity to write it internally in 10-bit and shoot in ProRes RAW. I don't know if Canon does that internally, but still, with that CF Express Type B card, it's better. And when you look at the fact that they're exact same price, what would you buy? You see, it's not a sin to call a spade a spade. If you want to shoot sports, you don't need an R6 Mark II. You should get an XH2S. That is a 100% guarantee. And to those of you that say, well, if you do that, you're not going to be getting as much light, especially in low light. Let me explain something to you. That is a damn lie. And that is something that has been, propped up and told by every YouTuber who doesn't understand what depth of field is, what light gathering is, and how to do the math for crop sensors. And here's an easy exercise I hope you'll be able to understand. I'm going to put some things on the screen. Overlaying on me right now should be a nice big circle. And this is going to represent the element or the light gathering or just the lens of a 50mm 1.2 lens from Canon, okay? That's a nice, awesome lens. L-glass, baby. It is the best. Now let's figure out how we get our depth of field. It's easy. Our depth of field equation is focal length times aperture equals depth of field. So 50mm times 1.2 equals our depth of field. That's going to tell us how shallow our depth of field is. That's pretty good, right? So nothing changes. 50mm is a 50mm is a 50mm. Now, if I was to adapt that lens though to the Canon R7, the way you guys speak of it, that means that when I adapt it on the R7, I have to apply crop factor to not only the focal length, and now all of a sudden it's a 75mm, which doesn't make sense, but also my aperture gets multiplied by 1.5, which makes it like a 2.8, which doesn't make any sense either because the lens is a 50mm 1.2 lens. So now my depth of field is off. But that's not actually what happens. You see, all that happens is, and you'll look and see, the sensor gets smaller, meaning the part of the lens that it's able to take from is now smaller as well. So what do I have here? I still have a 50mm lens at f1.2, and the depth of field stays exactly the same. The field of view is the only thing that changes. And because that field of view changes and we look at it as a 75mm field of view, a lot of people have done this in their head where they say, then it should give me 75mm results. And it doesn't, therefore APS-C is worse. It's not. You see, 50mm is 50mm is 50mm, and 1.2 is 1.2 is 1.2. There were no changes. The only thing that happened was now the sensor gets a cut crop of just more of the middle of the camera, and it doesn't have as much information reading on the outside. Now, a really simple way to put this into practice is look at APS-C glass from Fujifilm. Let's look at a 23mm 1.4 and the 50mm 1.0 from Fujifilm. You see, they keep saying the 23mm is the 35mm equivalent, and it is in field of view, but that lens is still a 23mm 1.4. Let's look at an example of what a 24mm 1.4 depth of field would be on Canon L glass. Well, at 23mm, the depth of field is only going to be a little bit wider on that Fujifilm lens because the lens is a 23mm, not a 35. Only in field of view is it 35. Now let's look at the 50mm lens from Fujifilm. If we take that same equation at 50mm 1.0, that equals our depth of field, this lens is actually faster than Fujifilm's 50mm 1.2. And it's not because it's cropped to 75mm in the field of view, it's because optically it's just better and optically it's just faster. There's no hate about it, but it absolutely 100% is true. The 50mm 1.0 from Fujifilm gives you better results than the 50mm 1.2 from Canon, and I believe it's almost at half the price. That's ridiculous, but that's what it is. Now, a lot of you may be thinking, well, back in the DSLR days, yeah, you're absolutely right. And DSLR APS-C cameras are most of the time really, really bad compared to full frame Canon, Nikon cameras. Why? Because those manufacturers wanted it that way. They purposely use more plastic and not only the bodies, but also the lenses. Y'all, APS-C lenses from Nikon and from Canon had plastic backs. They had plastic mounts. They were almost completely plastic. There are even some elements in some of these lenses from third party and from Canon Nikon that have plastic elements. They purposely shat on their own lineup so that people would say, if I want better images, I have to go full frame. And that's why a company like Fujifilm, a company like Ricoh Pentax with their K system, is kind of not only been breaking the mold for quite a long time, but is just so polarizing in the photography community, where you either love it because it's a good camera or you hate on it and you've never used it, but you have an opinion on it, because they use the exact same materials. They use the exact same building techniques, the exact same weather sealing, the exact same codecs, the exact same processor types, the exact same sensor types, except Fujifilm is an X-trans sensor, which has better low light performance due to the grain that you get out of it. But for the most part, it does everything that a full frame camera would do. The only difference is it chooses to be APS-C. And I think that's beautiful. I've been doing this for 10 years, and I used full frame cameras for 6 out of the 10 up until recently. And honestly, I have a couple full frame cameras with me, but they're not my primary ones. Why? Because Fujifilm outperforms in every single way that I need them to. Yes, I could go out and buy a Nikon Z9, I could go out and buy a Canon R3 or a Sony A1, but I don't need to, because the performance that I'm getting out of my Fujifilm cameras is more than enough. And even more, the build quality, the glass quality, and even the experience overall from the manufacturers with the help, the support, the warranties, the community, etc., are so great. Why would I change to something to where I don't even know if it's going to be as good as what I already have? I'm a professional. I am flown places to take photos. I get to work these jobs, these assignments, be in front of these amazing, great athletes, talk to these amazing, great people. I'm commissioned to take portraits, to do all of these different things. And I'm using a non-professional camera setup because it's APS-C. And I'm happy that this camera system not only performs the way I need to and blows a lot of these other cameras out of the water, but I don't have to pay for the software or the firmware upgrades to be able to get something to work. And they actually accept third-party lenses. Canon, I'm looking at you, because they're not insecure about their bottom line and they care about their consumer. With all that being said, hope you guys enjoyed it. You don't need full frame. Medium format's better anyway. Have a good one. Take it light, but take it.